whose answers I could have given you all myself. Right. I'm going to start with the legal constraints upon Sweden that are put in place by the European Union. The European Commission radiation protection laws are based on what's called the Basic Safety Standards Directive, which originally was brought in 1996. And one of the clauses in this Safety Standards Directive, which is the directive which is based on the ICRP risk model, and it says that the doses can't be more than 1 millisievert, and it calculates the amount of exposures you can get from each radionuclide so as to not exceed this 1 millisievert. But one of the clauses in there says, if new and important evidence emerges as to the accuracy of the basis for the standards, and this is under Article 5, justification, then all processes, all practices which involve the exposure of individuals to ionizing radiation have to be re-justified. That means if you find something that looks like there's a problem, the law says you have to do something about it. You have to go back and look at it again and figure out whether you're right or wrong. So then we have to ask ourselves, is there new and important information? Well, all of the presentations I've seen here have completely ignored all of the new and important information. Not one of these gentlemen here, and of course some of them, like this nice man who talks about ethics, it's not his area, but the areas of the people who should be knowing about these things are singularly focused on big doses, on the doses from Hiroshima, on external doses from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, on external doses to X-rays and hospital exposures and so forth. But there is an enormous literature of published studies that show that internal radionuclides at very low doses, conventionally expressed by the ICRP as microsieverts, the sorts of exposures that you're going to get from force mark, that these have significant effects. And I'm going to just briefly go through these because these are important and they have to be considered.
Can I just ask you, do you need maybe just mention the publications, because if you go through the whole list?
No, I'll be very quick, don't worry. I don't want to hold the proceedings. But
it's better to have them in writing though.
I'm just going to put a list of them on, one after another. I would have liked to come here and had a little 10 minutes with some slides, and it would have been a lot quicker, but I didn't get that opportunity, so I'm going to grasp this opportunity, if I may. The first one I've already talked about, which is the Fukushima thyroid cancers. This shows an error in the ICRP on the basis of the WHO doses of 2,000 times, all right? So we're not talking about small numbers here, we're talking very big numbers. There's an error of 2,000 times. Then we're talking about uranium. Gusevakano has done studies of uranium workers in Arriva in France, published in the literature, in proper journals, which shows effects in the uranium workers, cancers, leukemias, heart troubles, which show an error in the risk model of about 2,000 times. Then we talk about childhood leukemia near nuclear sites. In all of the studies that look at nuclear sites, you have increases in childhood leukemia, which show an error in the risk model of about 500 to 10,000 times. Then we've got 3 studies that I've done of nuclear sites, which have been published in the last 6 months in peer-reviewed literature, which show a doubling of breast cancer in women living close to nuclear sites or pollution in nuclear sites in 3 nuclear sites in the United Kingdom: Bradwell in Essex, Hinkley Point in Somerset, and Trawsfynydd in Wales. So all of these show effects at doses which are less than 1 millisievert, probably more like 100 microsieverts, 50 microsieverts, conventionally expressed. Then there's studies of sex ratio. There's a huge load of studies of children who were born after nuclear injections, like a fallout from the weapons testing, after Chernobyl, after Fukushima. You get an alteration in the number of boys born to the number of girls. It's a quite clear genetic effect. And then we have the problems with genetic damage. Now, one of the gentlemen here said that after Hiroshima, there was no genetic damage. They couldn't find any genetic damage in children. But those studies were begun 5 years after the bomb. And lots of people had died in that time. So this was a population that they studied that began in 1950. The bomb exploded in 1945. So there was an enormous increase in genetic damage there, which hasn't entered into the lifespan studies. Well, those are enough. I won't go on. But what I say is this: that the law requires the SSM, as a national competent authority in Sweden, to re-justify all of the practices involving exposure of populations. And the theoretical mechanisms that underpin this have to do with the binding of internal radionuclides to DNA. Because the risk model of the ICRP is a model involving the dilution of energy into a body which is considered to be like a sack of water. But that isn't how it works. Well, how it works is that these internal radionuclides are, first and foremost, they're chemicals. And they have chemical affinity for various parts of the body, molecular parts of the body inside cells. And some of them actually have high affinity for DNA, which is the target for radiation effects. And the most important one of these is uranium, which has a massive affinity for DNA, which has been known since 1963 and is all published in the literature. And I went to Melody at the beginning of this Melody conference in Paris, and I said all this stuff then, and nothing was done about it. But what is being done now is they have started to look at it. And when are they going to finish looking at it? 2020, by which time more people will have died. So what I'm saying is that we need to go to the SSM. The organizations in Sweden who are concerned about these issues need to require the SSM to investigate all of these studies that show effects at minute doses from internal radionuclides. And I'll leave it at that. That's the discussion. So discuss away. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.